Most people hear the word beehive and picture danger. I hear the sound that saved my garden. 3 years ago, after my wife Rachel passed away, I stopped caring about the vegetable beds she'd spent a decade building behind our house. The tomatoes shrank, the cucumbers struggled, and the apple trees barely produced any fruit. Then an elderly beekeeper at the local farmer's market convinced me to try something different. "Take care of the bees," he said, "and they'll take care of everything else." He wasn't exaggerating. By the second summer, my backyard had exploded with life. The apple trees were fuller than ever. Wildflowers bloomed along the fence. Butterflies drifted through the yard every morning, and Sophie loved sitting nearby while the bees quietly worked from flower to flower. The hive sat in the far back corner behind a 6-foot privacy fence, well away from neighboring properties and exactly where the county's beekeeping guidelines recommended. Nobody even noticed it. Until Denise Holloway climbed onto her patio furniture with binoculars. I wish I were kidding. I was watering the tomatoes when I heard someone shouting over the fence. "Ethan!" I looked up. Denise was standing on top of a chair, leaning over the fence with binoculars hanging around her neck. "What are those insects?" "Bees. I know they're bees." She pointed dramatically toward the back corner. "Why do you have a hive?" "Because that's where bees live." She frowned. "Those are dangerous." "They're honeybees. They're pollinating. They're working harder than most HOA board members." She didn't appreciate that comparison. "I've already counted at least 50. I laughed. "Only 50? There are probably 30,000 in there." Her face turned completely white. 30,000. They're inside the hive. They're not having a block party. She climbed down from the chair without another word. I figured the conversation was over. It wasn't. The violation notice appeared 2 days later. Hazardous animal activity. Nuisance creating safety concerns. Remove beehive within 14 days. I stared at the paper in complete disbelief. Sophie read it over my shoulder. They called bees hazardous animals? Apparently. She looked out toward the backyard where dozens of bees quietly floated between lavender bushes and blooming squash flowers. "They're literally collecting pollen." "I know. They're the least aggressive neighbors we have." That afternoon, Denise returned with 2 additional HOA board members. She pointed dramatically toward the fenced corner. "The hive presents a danger to residents." I folded my arms. "Has anyone been stung? No? Any complaints from immediate neighbors? No. Any documented incidents? No." She hesitated. "But there could be." Before I could answer, Mrs. Alvarez walked through the side gate carrying a basket. She smiled as she held it up. "Fresh tomatoes." She looked toward Denise. "I came to thank Ethan." Denise blinked. "For what?" Mrs. Alvarez reached into the basket and pulled out 2 enormous cucumbers. "My vegetable garden doubled its harvest after he brought those bees in." Mr. Lawson wandered over from next door. "So did my peach tree." Another neighbor joined us from across the street. "My flowers have never looked better." Within minutes, 3 different families were standing in my backyard, praising the bees Denise wanted removed. She looked genuinely confused. "You all support the hive?" Mrs. Alvarez smiled. "We support vegetables." The neighbors laughed. Denise didn't. She tucked the violation clipboard under her arm and walked toward the gate. "This isn't over." After everyone left, I carried the violation notice into my office. The county beekeeping permit hung framed on the wall beside my desk. I already knew the hive was legal, but Denise wasn't arguing about legality. She was arguing about appearances and imagined danger. So I opened my laptop and started researching something entirely different. Not beekeeping laws, pollinator conservation. An hour later, I found a city environmental initiative I'd never heard of before. Then I found a map. Then I found an application. By the time Sophie walked into the room, I couldn't stop smiling. "You found a loophole." I slowly turned the monitor toward her. "I think I found something much better." She read the page title aloud. City Pollinator Protection Program. Then she looked back at me. Uh-oh. I grinned. I don't think Denise realizes she just picked a fight with the people who protect the bees. The next morning, I called the city's Environmental Sustainability Office. A cheerful woman named Melissa answered on the second ring. When I explained that I had a legally permitted backyard beehive and wanted information about the Pollinator Protection Program, her enthusiasm immediately doubled. "You already have a registered hive?" "I do." "And native flowering plants?" "About half the backyard," she laughed. "You're exactly the kind of homeowner we're looking for." By that afternoon, she'd emailed me the application packet. The program wasn't just about protecting bees. It recognized private properties that provided critical habitat for pollinators like honeybees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and native bees. Homes meeting the city's environmental standards could receive official Pollinator Protection Zone designation, along with educational signage and recognition on the city's environmental map. I kept reading. Then I smiled. Then I laughed. Sophie looked over from the kitchen. "That good?" "Better." I handed her one page. She read a paragraph silently before looking back up. "Wait. The city actually encourages people to create pollinator habitats?" "They don't just encourage it. They help fund them." 2 days later, environmental specialist Dr. Emily Carter arrived in a city SUV with an official seal printed across both doors. Denise happened to be trimming flowers across the street. The moment she saw the city vehicle stop in front of my house, she immediately wandered over. "Can I help you?" Denise asked. Dr. Carter smiled politely. "I'm here to evaluate this property for the city's Pollinator Protection Program." Denise blinked. "The what?" "The Pollinator Protection Program." She pointed toward my backyard. "You mean the bees?" "Exactly." Denise looked at me. "You reported yourself?" "No. I invited experts." Dr. Carter spent nearly 2 hours walking through the backyard. She identified flowering plants, counted native species, measured the distance between the hive and neighboring structures, examined water sources for pollinators. Even the wildflower strip Sophie and I had planted along the back fence earned compliments. "This is outstanding," Dr. Carter said. "You've created a complete pollinator habitat." She pointed toward the apple trees. "The fruit production alone tells the story." Then she walked over to the hive. The bees floated calmly around the flowers without paying any attention to us. "They're remarkably gentle." "They've always been." Dr. Carter nodded. "Healthy colonies usually are." Denise folded her arms. "They're still dangerous." Dr. Carter looked at her. "Have they stung anyone?" "No." "Any complaints filed with animal control?" "No." "Any documented aggressive behavior?" "No." She smiled politely. "Then they're doing exactly what healthy honeybees are supposed to do." Several neighbors had gathered by then. Mrs. Alvarez carried over a basket filled with peppers. "My gardens never looked this good." Mr. Lawson held up a bag of peaches from his backyard. "I had to give half of these away this year." Another neighbor laughed. My wife thinks Ethan's bees deserve their own Christmas cards. The crowd chuckled. Denise didn't. Dr. Carter made a few final notes before closing her clipboard. I honestly wish more neighborhoods had properties like this. She looked directly at me. I'll be recommending full approval. Denise stepped forward. Approval for what, exactly? Dr. Carter reached into her vehicle and removed a sample sign. It was bright green with a gold border. Across the top it read, City of Riverbrook, Official Pollinator Protection Zone. Below that was a simple illustration of a honeybee surrounded by wildflowers. This sign identifies certified pollinator habitats participating in the city's conservation program. She smiled. Properties displaying it receive educational recognition and environmental protection under the city's Habitat Initiative. Denise stared at the sign, then at the hive, then back at the sign. So instead of removing the bees, you're giving him a government sign? Dr. Carter nodded. And officially recognizing the property. I couldn't help smiling. Denise noticed immediately. What? I looked at the sign one more time. I was just thinking. She narrowed her eyes. This backyard isn't about to become less noticeable. I paused. It's about to become one of the city's officially protected pollinator habitats. For the first time since this ridiculous argument began, Denise looked like she wished she'd never climbed onto that chair with her binoculars. By Tuesday evening, the Crestview Manor clubhouse was standing room only. Word had traveled much faster than anyone expected. Photos of the city's bright green Pollinator Protection Zone sign had spread across neighborhood social media pages, and suddenly the HOA meeting wasn't just about my backyard anymore. It had become a debate over whether the neighborhood wanted to oppose the city's own environmental conservation program. Caleb leaned toward me as we walked inside. I've seen zoning hearings with less publicity. Sophie grinned. I've also never seen 3 reporters outside an HOA meeting. I glanced through the clubhouse windows. She wasn't exaggerating. Denise Holloway stood at the front of the room beside the projector, looking far more serious than usual. A thick binder sat open on the table, its pages covered with color-coded tabs. She clearly intended to regain control before the discussion drifted completely out of her hands. She struck the gavel. This emergency architectural hearing concerns Lot 27 and an unauthorized beekeeping operation that has created visual and safety concerns within Crestview Manor. I stood. City-recognized Pollinator Protection Zone. She didn't even acknowledge the correction. The terminology changes nothing. It changes quite a bit, I replied calmly. The city seems to think so. Several residents laughed quietly. Denise clicked to the first slide. Large photographs of my backyard appeared on the projector. She zoomed in on the hive. The committee believes this structure remains visually inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Then she clicked again. A digital rendering replaced the photograph. The hive had been enclosed inside a decorative wooden shed covered with lattice panels and climbing vines. Tall ornamental shrubs surrounded the entrance until the hive was almost completely hidden from view. She folded her arms confidently. We believe these modifications would preserve aesthetics while maintaining the hive. Before I could respond, Dr. Emily Carter slowly stood from her chair. I strongly recommend against every one of those changes. The room became completely silent. She walked to the projector. Honeybees require clear flight paths. She pointed toward the proposed shrubs. These force bees to leave and return through obstacles. Then she indicated the decorative enclosure. Restricted airflow increases heat inside the hive. She looked directly at the board. During summer, colonies can overheat, become stressed, and actually become less healthy. Richard adjusted his glasses. So making it prettier could make it worse? Exactly. Dr. Carter nodded. Healthy bees are predictable. Stressed bees are not. Linda quietly lowered her folder. I didn't know landscaping could affect an entire colony. It absolutely can. Dr. Carter changed the slide to a city guideline. The Pollinator Protection Program specifically recommends open, unobstructed hive placement. She underlined one sentence with a laser pointer. Avoid decorative structures or vegetation that interfere with normal bee traffic. Frank Ellis, the newspaper editor, quietly snapped another photograph. Denise noticed. Mr. Ellis, why are you photographing an HOA meeting? He smiled politely. Because this stopped being an HOA story. What is it now? He lowered the camera. It's the story of a neighborhood deciding whether appearance is more important than environmental conservation. Several homeowners nodded. Mrs. Alvarez slowly stood. My tomatoes tripled after Ethan installed those bees. Mr. Lawson followed. My peach orchard produced the biggest harvest in 15 years. Another resident raised her hand. My grandchildren come over just to watch the butterflies now. One by one, neighbors began sharing their experiences. More flowers, more vegetables, more birds, more butterflies. Nobody talked about danger. Nobody talked about ugly hives. They talked about gardens coming back to life. Richard finally leaned toward Denise. I have a question. She nodded. If the city officially recognizes this property as protected pollinator habitat, what authority does the HOA actually have to require changes that city environmental specialists advise against? Denise immediately opened her binder. She flipped through several pages. Stopped. Turned another section. Stopped again. The answer wasn't there, because no one had ever expected the HOA to challenge a city conservation program. At that exact moment, the clubhouse doors opened. Everyone turned. A woman wearing a navy blazer embroidered with the City of Riverbrook seal stepped inside, carrying a leather portfolio. Dr. Carter smiled. I wasn't expecting her. I recognized her from the city's website immediately. Environmental Services Director Angela Whitmore had personally come to the hearing. Judging by Denise's expression, she realized the conversation had just grown far bigger than the HOA had ever imagined. Environmental Services Director Angela Whitmore walked confidently to the front of the clubhouse, setting her leather portfolio beside the HOA board's paperwork. The room fell completely silent. Even Denise Holloway lowered her binder. Angela smiled politely before addressing the board. Good evening. I wasn't originally planning to attend tonight, but Dr. Carter informed me there were questions regarding one of the city's newest pollinator protection zones. She opened her portfolio and removed several official documents bearing the City of Riverbrook seal. I thought it would be helpful to explain why this designation exists. Richard immediately leaned forward. We'd appreciate that. Angela placed a framed certificate on the table in front of me. Across the top, in bold green lettering, it read, City of Riverbrook, Official Pollinator Protection Zone, Certified Urban Habitat. Sophie smiled the moment she saw it. Angela continued. This afternoon, Mr. Cole's property officially completed certification. She clicked a remote. A city environmental map appeared on the projector. Green flower icons dotted neighborhoods throughout Riverbrook. Only one icon appeared inside Crestview Manor. It rested directly over my backyard. Our department maps every certified pollinator habitat in the city. She pointed toward the screen. These locations help us monitor declining pollinator populations, guide conservation projects, and coordinate environmental education throughout the community. Linda looked surprised. So Ethan's backyard is actually part of a city conservation network? It is. Angela nodded. Private homeowners are essential partners. She smiled toward me. Without residents volunteering their properties, this program wouldn't exist. Mrs. Alvarez slowly raised her hand. So these bees aren't just helping our gardens. They're helping the entire city? Angela smiled. Exactly. Honeybees and native pollinators don't recognize property lines. They support parks, community gardens, fruit trees, school gardens, even local farms. She paused. A healthy pollinator habitat benefits everyone. Denise finally spoke. Our concern has always been neighborhood appearance. Angela remained calm. I understand. She removed one final document from her portfolio. This is the city's official recommendation regarding certified pollinator habitats. Copies were handed to every board member. Richard quietly read the opening paragraph aloud. The city strongly discourages unnecessary relocation, enclosure, visual obstruction, or alteration of certified pollinator habitats when such actions may reduce habitat effectiveness or colony health. Linda continued reading. Certified properties represent valuable environmental infrastructure supporting biodiversity, food production, and long-term ecological resilience. The clubhouse became completely still. Angela folded her hands. If any organization knowingly pressures homeowners to reduce or damage certified habitat without legitimate safety concerns, that organization works directly against the city's environmental conservation goals. Nobody said a word. Denise slowly closed her binder. For the first time all evening, she had completely run out of arguments. Richard cleared his throat. I'd like to make a motion. Linda nodded. Go ahead. I move that all violations against Lot 27 be dismissed immediately. He looked toward Angela. And I further move that legally permitted beehives participating in recognized government conservation programs be permanently exempt from HOA aesthetic enforcement. Melissa immediately raised her hand. I second. Another board member followed. So do I. Denise glanced around the table. Every board member supported the motion. Not one opposed it. The motion passes unanimously, Linda announced. Applause erupted throughout the clubhouse. Mrs. Alvarez hugged Sophie, while Mr. Lawson walked over carrying a small jar. I've been saving this. He handed it to me. Fresh honey from my previous harvest. Seems like the perfect night to give it back, he smiled. You didn't just protect your bees. You protected everyone else's right to help them. He wasn't wrong. Over the next 6 months, 4 more homeowners joined the city's pollinator protection program. Crestview Manor planted native wildflower beds around the entrance. The HOA quietly removed its restrictions on registered beehives, and the city recognized the neighborhood as one of Riverbrook's fastest-growing community pollinator corridors. The biggest surprise came that fall. Riverbrook selected my backyard as the location for its annual Pollinator Awareness Day. Families toured the garden, local schools brought students to learn about honeybees, and city officials unveiled a permanent educational plaque beside the flower beds. The same hive Denise had called hazardous became the centerpiece of a city-sponsored environmental celebration. As for Denise, she never reported my bees again. Every spring afterward, I noticed her patio filling with flower pots she'd never grown before. One afternoon, I even caught her standing quietly near the fence, watching the honeybees drift from blossom to blossom. She saw me looking, quickly turned away, and pretended to inspect her roses instead. I smiled and let her have the moment. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't the honey. It's watching the person who tried to get rid of the bees end up planting flowers for them. So remember this from Sovereign Verdict. Subscribe for more stories. Know your local laws, and never let an HOA Karen convince you that nature is an eyesore. Sometimes protecting one small beehive helps an entire community bloom.